But Dean, I actually want to start off with you because you're someone who has written about abundance. And, people are at a loss right now, or they claim to be at a loss. I think some people genuinely are, like some good faith people don't know what to do about Trump. Then you have bad faith people who I think do know what to do about Trump, but they don't want to do what is needed to do because that would be inconvenient for them and their donors, perhaps. What is abundance, the abundance movement, which is really kind of the unofficial anthem of centrist Democrats? What is the abundant movement, and how did you intersect with it while you were in office?
Well, never underestimate the ability of centrist Democrats to kind of repackage the same thing and call it the new shiny object that is the future. And that's abundance. I've interacted with the abundance movement mostly through it as applied to housing. But it is, of course, broader than that. But it's essentially the idea of creating, quote unquote, abundant housing by just deregulating housing and letting developers and corporate landlords do whatever they want to create as much housing as possible, under the theory that it will then somehow become affordable to working class people because of trickle-down economics. So it really is just a form of blaming regulations for the failure to produce for people's needs, and trying to popularize the idea that if we just deregulate these industries, that we're going to create an abundance of housing or other services that trickle down to everyone else. It doesn't work. It's never worked, especially in the realm of housing, where all the housing that gets created in expensive cities now, unless it's regulated in some way through rent control or through social housing, affordable housing, it's all unaffordable to working class people. Ezra Klein has popularized this. He did not start it. There is a movement. There was Abundant SF. There are now abundance organizations. It's a political movement of mostly neoliberal Democrats trying to push a deregulation agenda as if it's going to solve a housing crisis, which it won't.
Right. And Kate, I know that you talk a lot about abundance on your excellent podcast, Dystopia Now. You also talk a lot about it on Twitter. And I know that you focus on how it goes after certain politicians, right? There's this kind of intersection, this abundance tech bro intersection. What do we need to be aware of? Because another reason I want to do this panel is because, of course, a lot of people are talking about the Zohran Mamdani election. And so we're going to see, I think, a lot of things that were applied in San Francisco and in other areas. I think they'll be applied to Zohran. So, Kate, you, I know, actually had Dean on your show. So tell us what you think the connection between actually like Dean and the abundance tech bro movement is.
So I think, in 2024, just to kind of look at the broader picture, Silicon Valley went, for the most part, right. Like the major players went to Trump, and there's a few big tech donors left in the Democratic Party. There's Dustin Moskowitz, who is one of the biggest donors. He has an organization called Open Philanthropy, which is an effective altruist organization. And then there's also Reid Hoffman. And what I think abundance is like basically some of these big tech donors. Patrick Collison is another one, although he donates to Republicans as well. These kind of remaining Democrats in Silicon Valley making a pitch to the rest of Silicon Valley, the right side, and saying like, hey, you can actually do your stuff in the Democratic Party again. We don't have to mess with Trump. And there's also going to be advantages by being in the Democratic Party. Like we can be pro-growth, we can not have tariffs, and we can be even more abundant, I guess, even more deregulated. And, like in a way, okay, yeah, it would be really good if Trump is not the president. We're all in agreement there, I think. But, with the abundance agenda, and especially this pitch to kind of get the tech right back, there's some very creepy things that go with it, which we could maybe get into. But it's also just, I think, very anti-union, very much anti-antitrust. Like Lena Khan was enemy number one for a lot of these guys. And, I think the last thing that we really need right now is the donor defeat of left populism will be in Trump land forever.
Right. And Shanti, what about you? What is your experience with this movement been, or what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, it started. I mean, I was getting started as an organizer the same time they were getting started here in San Francisco. And I just moved here. And I was very much like, it's always been interesting to me because I think I was kind of in the demographic that would have been like a target abundance person, except that I've never ever been. In that, like, I was new to San Francisco. I was a tech worker at the time. I haven't been in a long time, but like I was kind of coming in, and that's really who they were kind of recruiting from. I think it was more at that time, where in a way that it is not now, a little bit more like tinged with like kind of what was going on in the culture, like in terms of like talking about racial justice, talking about ending residential segregation, things that we all care about and want. It's way more naked now, and I think that is a consequence to what like Kate said about like the Trump turn in Silicon Valley. They don't really care or talk about that stuff anymore. But that's really how it started, and I think that's how it brought a lot of people in. But at the same time, like they came out the gate like opposing regulations on Airbnb, opposing organized tenants in communities of color, especially who are fighting for affordable housing instead of market rate housing. They were siding with the market rate housing, opposing those tenants, screaming at people at rallies, things like that. So, I mean, they always kind of had this flavor, even when they were trying to talk more like progressively, right? They still always had this sort of like tech flavor. They've never really been able to extricate themselves in any or be really independent of what Silicon Valley does.
Got it. Now, Dean, can you talk a little bit about your own political trajectory, especially because my show focuses on national politics, and not everyone watching knows about the Board of Supervisors. So tell us what you have kind of dedicated your career to doing, and what lessons should be taken from your own personal journey, political journey.
Yeah, and the two are really connected. I just want to say, when I read Ezra Klein's book on abundance, what really struck me was not that the ideas, some of the ideas were off, and none of it was really new. But what really struck me was the complete absence of talking about the things that have actually worked to make housing more affordable for people, right? So rent control, efforts to decommodify housing. Shanti's been involved with a lot of those around creating community land trusts, creating limited equity co-ops, creating social housing. There's all different ways to actually create housing that is regulated and affordable, where people can't have their rent jacked up. People can't just be kicked out because a big corporate landlord decides to kick them out. And as I reflect on it in response, to your question, it's like so much of my work has been all the stuff they won't talk about. Right. They won't talk about the need for rent control, right? Well, we've been so my background is for 20 years before I was in elected office. I was a tenant rights attorney and activist. I founded a statewide tenant rights organization, helped lead the charge to save rent control when there was a landlord ballot measure to abolish rent control across California. And we defeated that, wrote the right to counsel legislation, and worked with the DSA chapter here in San Francisco to pass one of the strongest right to counsel, so that any tenant who's facing eviction gets a free lawyer, kind of like a public defender model, that has dramatically reduced evictions. During the pandemic, we led the way in San Francisco. I wrote eviction bans. I also wrote a measure to tax billionaires who are selling property worth $10 million or more. We doubled their tax, and we used that money to pay the back rent of tenants who are now, we banned the evictions, but people still didn't have the money. So we taxed rich developers and corporate landlords to pay those back rents. So my work around right to counsel, strong rent control, taxing the rich to fund rent relief and affordable housing really has, I hope, been impactful. We know when I was in office, we can document 20,000 people who were not displaced from their homes because of that, according to a city report. And that's just, I think, the tip of the iceberg. And so we really showed that you can take eviction off the table, and that you can tax the rich to help folks who are struggling to pay their rent. And so, not surprisingly, by doing that kind of work, you earn some enemies, particularly the folks who you're taxing. And so the big real estate tycoons have always attacked me from the right, and then the tech YIMBY, abundance, all these, whatever name you give it, what has been the driving force in creating a whole bunch of shadowy political organizations in San Francisco with very nice sounding names like
Right.
Labor for a Better San Francisco and Together SF. And, it's kind of humorous. Every year they come up with new names. But, they've engaged in a pretty extensive smear campaign against me, against other progressives, against folks like Kate, who you have on, who have been vocal online, criticizing this kind of tech swing to the right. So I was the first Democratic Socialist elected in San Francisco in 40 years, and tried to govern like I said I was going to govern. And I think we had a pretty big impact during my time in office, but also that earned us, being targeted by a pretty big operation of disinformation and money in San Francisco. And I won 2 elections, served 5 years, and then lost my reelection bid last year.
Right. And we've had on the show before, for instance, Chesa Boudin, who's kind of another casualty of astroturfed evil campaigns that give themselves really nice names.